One of the most noticeable differences between public and private prisons is that inmates in private prisons tend to spend more time in prison than inmates in public prisons do. In addition to writing better contracts, the establishment of an independent prison oversight board would also monitor the actions of the private prison. Local and state entities contract with private corporations to run government jails and prisons, and there's often a profit motive involved.
Maybe it's difficult to find the money to build a new prison. It's like hard to staff everybody right away and all these things. And so I started to do some work on this as well. And it seems that the main mechanism is that the inmates who are in private prison just accumulate many more conduct violations. Like they have double the number of conduct violations than those in public prison. And that could be for many reasons, right? So these are conduct violations like disobeying the guard, refusing to work. It could be contraband. It could be all kinds of things. When we think about privatizing our justice system, we think about the punishment being the same, right? But by no means in any of our discussions of privatization do we think that people should get more punishment just because they ended up in a private prison. And so I think this finding that they spend more time raises serious questions about how we can best write these contracts if we write them at all.
In addition to writing better contracts, the establishment of an independent prison oversight board would also monitor the actions of the private prison.
Necessarily bad to have a private prison in there, but if you do have one in there, you really need like a third party to monitor what they're doing.
Mm.
And you're monitoring a few things. Not only are you monitoring what they're doing in the private prison, uh, you'll have to monitor how they interact with judges or the justice system and monitor how they interact with lobby groups because you don't want those to be influenced. The laws created in the justice system and how judges are affected. It doesn't mean that they're not good outright. There's always potential in almost anything. You
Yeah.
just have to be careful in how you incentivize them to do their work.
In addition to writing better contracts, the establishment of an independent prison oversight board would also monitor the actions of the private prison.
Um, but there's basically double of the in private prison compared to public prison. Now, somebody could say, well, maybe the public guards are lazy and the public ones are just writing everybody up because they're paid, in a certain way to do it. Maybe that's more accurate. And the answer would be that's possible. We don't know. Um, and I think what's happening, given more kind of research in the space, is that the private prisons, the main way that they save money is that they hire cheaper labor, right? So 80% of the costs of running a prison are just the people, the labor. And public prisons tend to have to hire union guards, which are more expensive, and union staff. And private prisons tend to hire non-union staff. So in Mississippi, for example, this is the difference between paying a guard 35,000 in a public prisons versus 18,000 in a private prison each year. And so you have much younger, much more inexperienced guards. You have high turnover. And you can imagine that when you have this type of contract that basically says, I'll pay you per person per day, the prison says, okay, I'm going to spend the least possible per day so that I can maximize my profit. And so it may not be super intentional, right? They hire these people who don't really know what they're doing. There's a lot of turnover. And when you have those types of disciplinary people, they might just resort to a lot of infractions, right? So for whatever reason, the private prison one's getting many more of these conduct violations, which then the parole board, which is on the public side, sees, well, I don't know, Anita got 20 violations, Aislinn has 10. I guess let's keep Anita in longer and let Aislinn go. They're not sensitive to who's in private or public. And so I think that's what's driving these differences. And there's some ways that we could have to try and deal with it. Like you could have more monitoring, you could have more standardization on these infractions and things like that. But in general, I think the core problem is still that the people who end up in private prison are simply getting different treatment, and that I think we would all agree is unacceptable.